Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Tuesday everybody. Yesterday, Sichuan's Chengdu, population 21 million, exited its 2 weeks of lockdown. Authorities announced that people with negative COVID test results were allowed to leave their homes and return to pre-lockdown life. Well, almost. Residents are still required to be tested at least once a week or once every 3 days if they want to enter public spaces or take public transportation. We remember that the southwestern provincial capital is the biggest city to have implemented a citywide lockdown since the devastating 2-month-long Shanghai lockdown earlier this year. As we move closer to the sensitive party Congress, local officials will become increasingly cautious about outbreaks. It is hoped that after the Congress, Beijing may signal to the country that restrictions can be eased and zero COVID replaced with a policy more akin to living with the virus, like many other regions around the world. Indeed, Hong Kong looks to be moving in that direction this week. However, other analysts warn that it could be some time before such a transition occurs. As China has almost no herd immunity and a large unvaccinated elderly population, the initial stage of any transition presents possible social instability concerns. However, with COVID variants becoming more infectious, that means China is needing to lock down and impose heavier restrictions more often, imposing massive economic and human costs on the country. Indeed, analysts from Nomura to Goldman Sachs have expressed that, along with the housing crisis, zero COVID remains the strongest headwind slowing down the Chinese economy. The longer China waits to transition to a more relaxed policy, the higher the cost becomes. Next up, on Sunday, in an interview with US-based CBS News' 60 Minutes, asked whether he would deploy US forces to defend Taiwan from Chinese military action, US President Joe Biden replied, quote, "Yes, if in fact there was an unprecedented attack." When the interviewer sought clarification, asking, quote, "So unlike Ukraine, to be clear, sir, US forces, US men and women would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion," end quote. Biden once again unambiguously responded in the affirmative, with a yes. For many years, the US has maintained a policy of strategic ambiguity in relation to the so-called Taiwan issue. That is, in order to deter destabilizing challenges to the status quo from either side of the Taiwan Strait, the US is ambiguous on the question of what it would do in the event of a military crisis. That being the case, it's unclear whether President Biden's very unambiguous comments are gaffes, fake gaffes to signal to Beijing, or an intentional rejection of official strategic ambiguity policy. Some experts in recent months have argued the Biden administration should adopt a policy of strategic clarity. Analysts have also been quick to point out that some of the president's other statements in the interview are inconsistent with the State Department's own policy position. For example, he expressed, quote, "Taiwan makes their own judgments about their independence, that's their decision," end quote, when the official language of the State Department is, quote, "We do not support Taiwan independence," end quote. Unsurprisingly, Beijing is not too happy. On Monday, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said Beijing, quote, "deplores and rejects," end quote, the comments. Quote, "In my view, strategic ambiguity is being eroded, but what is replacing it is closer to strategic confusion than strategic clarity. China has long assumed that the US would defend Taiwan if attacked, so these statements only reinforce the People's Liberation Army's planning. I suspect that China focuses greater attention on US capabilities to defend Taiwan, which many people question," end quote. Last week, the Taiwan Policy Act, authorizing $6.5 billion in funding for weapons and military training for Taiwan and requiring the imposition of sanctions on major Chinese state-owned banks in the event of an attack on the island, was passed by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It now goes to the Senate and then the House. Hey guys, if you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. And for anyone who wants to go the extra mile, as always, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. This is the best way to help support China Update. So if you like what I'm doing here and want to help me keep it sustainable, those options are there too. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, the Chinese economy, and let's start with savings rates. Household confidence, as we know, has taken a big hit this year, and we have seen the effect that this has had on retail sales. On the other side of the coin, though, household savings rates have also increased. According to the most recent quarterly survey by the People's Bank of China, China's central bank, almost 60% of people are now inclined to save more rather than consume or invest more, a moderate jump from just under 45% in 2019 before the pandemic. Chinese households overall added 10.8 trillion RMB, approximately $1.54 trillion US, in new bank savings in the first 8 months of this year. This is up from 6.4 trillion RMB in the same period of last year. Next up for the economy, continuing with our coverage of the mega conglomerate Fosun in Mandarin, the group's main investment arm, Fosun International Limited, has been quietly reducing its holdings of a few Hong Kong traded companies, a sign that the firm is seeking to raise funds. We remember that recently Beijing cautioned state-owned enterprises about the potential risks of doing business with the company, sparking fears that the huge conglomerate could be in trouble. We will continue to keep our eye on the company. And finally, for the economy and for today's video, we have been following the rollout of an upcoming 200 billion yuan, approximately $28 billion US, special loan program to help developers finish stalled housing projects. We know very well that the now year-long housing crisis has led to a plunge in new projects and put about 5% of existing apartment construction on hold, sparking the mortgage payment boycotts movement, which we have been following for almost 2 months now. We remember too that regulators have made it clear that the National Rescue Fund does not aim to stimulate the real estate market or rescue developers. For this Herculean task, the government has turned to other measures, which we've been following for the last few weeks, but rather this $200 billion fund will be used, quote, strictly for the construction and delivery of residential projects, end quote. That is, it is to be used strictly to make sure that these stalled projects get completed so that this mortgage boycott does not spread and threaten the financial system. Now, it appears that many crisis-hit developers are scrambling for some of this support. Chinese financial outlet Caixin writes that, according to sources, developers have this month been urging their regional branches to file loan applications as soon as possible, and local authorities are conducting audits to select the first batch of projects to finance. One industry insider told the outlet this week that, for example, in Chengdu, provincial capital of Henan province, and mortgage boycott hotspot, 95 projects had applied for loans by the 12th of September, but, quote, not all the applications will necessarily be approved, end quote, and that, quote, the authorities will aim to extend loans to projects that are seen to be less risky bets, end quote, and that authorities will be looking for developers to provide assets as collateral, and developers will be required to undergo an audit and disclose how much money they have moved out of pre-sales escrow accounts. Cash-strapped developers will have no choice either. We remember that some local governments, like the above-mentioned Chengdu, have given builders a deadline to resume construction on unfinished projects or face criminal investigation for fraud and embezzlement. With bondholders, banks, and would-be home buyers now not touching them, these developers are now lining up for this special fund. Home buyers appear to be taking a wait-and-see approach too, with the mortgage boycott movement continuing to slowly fester. According to the GitHub open-source site entitled We Need Home, the number of projects across China whose buyers have joined the boycott was 342 as of the 16th of September, just a few days ago, up modestly from 319 in late July. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.